Welcome everyone, another episode of Back and Forth with Becker and Orr. Kevin and I are ready to go. There's lots of topics to tackle today. You can see them on the bottom of the screen there, including the lead-off subject, inflation. It's certainly gone up. Will it stick around? We'll get into that.
Yes, welcome to Back and Forth. It's another episode. We got lots of topics to talk about today, and we are going to start soon. But if you need to see this video or any of the other ones we've done, our Financial 15s or any of our special original series stuff, please go to our website at beckerorr.com. Go to our YouTube channel or like us on Facebook. We're more than happy to talk to you whenever we get a chance. So we're going to start today's Back and Forth off with inflation. Clint mentioned that it's gone up. Is this something that we have to worry about? Let's get into it.
Yeah, the Canadian numbers, U.S. numbers, we've seen them going up. In the U.S., it's over 5%, not quite as high in Canada for the inflation figures. But I found this, Kevin, I think this is a good launching point for that inflation chat. This was done by Matthew Klein. He's got a Substack called The Overshoot. He looked at the U.S. data for the month of July, and then he broke it down into categories. He said, all right, which ones are going to be, call them reopen categories? That's what's the blue on the screen here. Ones that are really impacted by the pandemic, like used cars, hotels, airline fares, recreation services, things that had a big disruption from the pandemic. Everything else, which is in red. And then the green bar there is the average over the last 25 years. You notice that the red and the green are pretty much the same size. And then the blue, which is all the pandemic disruptions, accounts for the bulk of the inflation. So the theory there is those pandemic disruptions eventually get figured out and inflation goes down. Are you buying that? Does that make some sense?
Yeah, I think it's what a lot of the major central banks have been saying. We've heard that from Powell down in the U.S. We've heard that in Canada, that, look, the inflation that we're getting right now is transitory. This is not something that's going to be sticking around forever. Again, we've had supply issues, so things aren't coming as fast. We've had, well, at least this year, we've had drought. So, I mean, you're going to find food prices going up and things like that. But this is not sustainable going forward. Again, as you mentioned, because as the world starts to reopen, all these things start to decimate. You're going to have people traveling again, so that's going to help out. You're going to have the supply issues fixed. So again, you're going to probably get back somewhere to that 2 to 3% range that the governments look for. And I think, yeah, I mean, right now it's really nice. And I mean, if you were getting mortgage rates and everything set off transitory, I'd be a little bit more worried. But I think that this is going to definitely contain itself. Now, whether that happens in a 6-month period or it's another year and a half, that I can't tell you. But I do believe that this is the way it's going. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the key. There's the time frame, right? We can say it'll eventually normalize, but when's eventually? Does that happen 6 months from now, or is that 5 years from now? I don't think it'll be 5 years, but the longer it sticks around, the bigger impact it has. And we can't forget that inflation is certainly a personal experience, right? The goods I buy are different than the goods and services you buy. So our experience with inflation is going to be a little different. It'll impact our pocketbook in different ways. And the longer it sticks around, in my view, the more likely some of it won't be transitory. Some of it could actually bake its way into wages. And then if you get a wage and price cycle, then it's going to probably be a longer lasting impact. But the initial notion, I'll pull this up again, that blue bar, all those reopening categories, we shut the economy down. You had a big disruption. Eventually those normalize. I agree with that. It's just a matter of timing. How long does it take for that to happen? Does it happen overnight, or does it happen in 6 months, 8 months, a year? That's really the big question.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the biggest factor we have to worry about. This is not the 80s all over again, but by the same token, the longer it lasts, you make some good points. Okay, That's been covered somewhat. Let's get on to the election. Here in Canada, we are having another election. Gee, it looks like it just happened 2 years ago. And I would say that's probably pretty right. Now, in regard to elections, though, we want to touch on the bigger picture. Does a Canadian election really have an effect on what's going on in the markets?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer, no. I can't think of a time where the election really swayed the markets big one way or the other. And I think there's a few reasons for that. The first reason is for the parties in Canada that have a chance at really forming government, of being elected. I mean, there's no extremes. It's not as if you have one party way over here and the other party on the opposite end of the spectrum, and they're completely different. I'm not saying there aren't differences. Of course, there's differences. I'm simply saying they're more incremental in fashion. So the idea that we're going to get a complete big turn one direction or the other after an election seems unlikely. So we tend not to get big reactions from the market, because the market doesn't like surprises, right? It wants an amount of certainty and amount of predictability. So if the parties are incrementally different, that's a little more easier to predict than the extremes. So that's probably part of the reason the market likely won't care about the election.
Yeah, and again, I mean, some of the policies and things that they're looking at, I mean, if you deal with healthcare, they're all similar in that sort of aspect. If you're dealing with money that's going into the economy, there's going to be very much similarities in there. And again, I always look at it sort of as, Canada's more like 3% of the world in trading. So for the rest of the world, yeah, Canada's having an election, big deal, doesn't affect our markets. For the Canadian market as a whole, I mean, unless somebody comes out and says we're shutting down all oil and gas tomorrow, we're not going to get that big a move. I mean, there's going to be scenarios that come around that make that, more of an interesting point of what's moving forward. But yeah, I think that it's going to have relatively little effect. And again, whether or not we even get a change in government based on the way things are going right now may not even happen. So if we get another majority or minority government, things will stay the same. And I don't think anybody's going to change anything on that line.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the next topic, we've talked about this before. Are we due for a correction? And it just seems the time between the last correction continues to grow, and well over 200 days now since the last correction. I'll bring this up. Lots of data here, but I'll walk us through it. This was done by Ed Clissold, Ned Davis Research, NDR. And what he looked at, U.S. data, S&P 500, that's the top panel. And you can say it's steadily been increasing over the years. And then he, in the second panel, third panel, fourth panel, he looked at the time between a 5% drop, second panel, time between a 10% drop and a 20% drop there on the bottom. And you can see the number of days, which are those triangles, continues to increase. And right now we're at a spike. It's been over 200 days since we've seen a 5% correction in the market. That's a long time. But the big takeaway here is not so much are we going to get a correction, because we know eventually it'll happen, but the bulk of those triangles, those big spikes, they happen in the green zones, which are bull markets. I don't think that's a huge number. He did the data. He said last 14 times we had these long, calm stretches, 11 of them happened in secular bull markets. I think that's the bigger takeaway here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the biggest factor is sooner or later, if you keep going up and up and up, you're going to get a fall. I mean, traditionally, when you're in a recessionary time frame, you're already in a downward movement. So if you're going downward, you may continue for a little bit, but you're not going to get these sort of spikes where, okay, we get 200 days, then we're going to have a 30% fall off. You're right. Any sort of a correction is, well, the market's moved up this much. Yeah, some of the correction comes in. Now, it could be for a variety of different reasons, but you're right. It's usually in the midst of a secular bull. So even if we get that 5 or an 8% correction or what happens, chances are where we're sitting right now with fiscal and monetary policies that are going on, you still got more years left on this run. It'll come back and it'll continue to rate no highs. I mean, yesterday, the S&P had its 50th new high for the year. Now, based on that, will we get a 51? I'm pretty sure we will. It could happen today. But so you're right. I mean, this is something that a correction will come. It always has to, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be the end of the bull market as we know it, or that it's going to be as severe as anything else.
Yeah, and that's the takeaway there. The idea being he just had a whole bunch of data that backed it up, that lo and behold, when you have these long uptrends, you do get corrections, but generally the uptrend continues, right? Markets tend to go up over the long term. That's kind of the takeaway there. Moving on to the Delta variant to New Zealand. What's happening there, Kevin?
Well, yeah, I mean, New Zealand, basically, it was just over a week ago, or a little less actually, that they reported their first Delta variant case. And what did they do? They shut the whole country down. Now, you don't see that here at all, or in the US or anything else, but in New Zealand, they shut everything down with the first, because of how rapid the Delta variant spreads of COVID. They wanted to make sure that they could sort of keep that at bay best they could. And again, if I take a look right now, I mean, they presently reported over the weekend that they had another 36 cases that have shown up since then. So, I mean, that's 36 cases is the most they've had since April. Not April of this year, but April of 2020. So they really have contained things quite well. But as we're starting to see, a lot of this will have to do with vaccination. Theoretically, from what I understand, they only have 20% of their adult population vaccinated. That's got to have a bearing, don't you think?
I think that is a big factor, right? Lockdown was their strategy, and it worked well. It worked well for the first couple of waves, and now they're doing it again for the fourth wave here. But vaccination was a kind of a plan B or a secondary strategy, because they're only at 21%. I had it on my other screen here, 21.4%, the official figure, compared to 66% here in Canada, or 75% specifically in Manitoba. So you're seeing 3 to 4 times the amount of vaccination. That certainly has to be weighing on them, is why they locked down so quickly, right? Lockdowns worked for them the first time around. They didn't have a lot of vaccination, so they went right back to the lockdown. I'm not sure you'd see something as severe in Canada for that reason, because we have a much higher vaccination rate.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a big factor. And that may be a leading now with the Delta variant being so much of a spreader compared to the other initial COVID scenario, that we could see more and more vaccinations going on in New Zealand and Australia, and places that theoretically where the lockdown happened before it mattered. But I mean, if they've gone from 1 to 36 cases in a fairly quick time frame, I think they're going to seriously have to start looking at, well, we need more people vaccinated going from there.
Yeah.
That being said, that's a quick sort of scenario from there. Our question today: will the
Question
Bombers repeat and win the Grey Cup?
Question of the week, and this is just tailor-made for Kevin, you're a sports fan. Will the Bombers repeat a Grey Cup champs? You asked me after week 1, week 2, I'd say yes, they're looking phenomenal. Yes. Not nearly as confident after last week. Not the best showing there against Toronto. But realistically, it's the CFL, right? Where the top 6 teams make the playoffs. Really, you got to make the playoffs, and you put together a few good games, and they still have a strong team, even despite last week's performance. So in my view, yes, I think they have a shot at repeating as champs.
Yeah, and you're correct. I mean, it's all about making the playoffs. That's the biggest factor here. Whether you make it in at a 500 team or you make it in as the top of the league, it really doesn't have that much bearing. Because, I mean, when we take a look even at last year, the Bombers finished 3rd in the West. They had to play 2 road games before they even got to the Grey Cup, and they won both of those, going into Calgary, going into Saskatchewan, and then beating Hamilton. And they were the underdog in every one and managed to come through. So, yeah, definitely with the team they have this year, I think they really put together a strong defense. Their offense is starting to come along again. There's a few new position players in there, but they definitely have the team similar to last year that can contend. And we've been playing the first few weeks without Darvin Adams, without our famous running back, Mr. Harris. So once you get all these guys back in, that could be a different story going forward. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think we have a good chance to win it again, and hopefully we can have a parade this year.
That's right. We didn't get to fully celebrate last time's victory.
That's right.
2019. I was going to say last year, but it was actually 2 years ago. So we didn't have a 2020 season. But if you have more questions for us, another topic you want us to tackle, really anything in the financial world, simply contact us. Chatwithclintonandkevin.com. Always happy to help out. Any parting words for folks, Kevin?
No, I haven't run the sports blog yet, but we'll see if I can get that up and running later on. Other than that, I think we've done well today.
All right, everyone, stay safe and take care.